A great honor for me to be here representing my father and the legacy of W.E.B. Du Bois. I want to share with you in the way that I believe he might have shared with you today my thoughts. Near the end of the First World War, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote, "Most men in this world are colored. A belief in humanity means a belief in colored men. The future world will, in all reasonable probability, be what colored men make it." The aggression against Iraq and the much heralded war against terrorism have a single objective. That objective is to stop the future world being made by colored men and women. This in face of the fact that more than 4/5 of the peoples of the world are peoples of color. Current leadership in the US and in the UK are determined that European global white supremacy shall not be challenged by Arab, African, Asian, or Central or South American. They are determined that they and their kith and kin shall rule forever. The preemptive strike against Iraq was the formal announcement to the world of the intent to consolidate and expand European, North American domination and hegemony over all the peoples of the world, and over the peoples of color, a new, and they claim, humane, benign imperial colonialism. U.S. foreign policy, from its inception, has been characterized by that young nation's relationship with peoples of color. The nations of the Native American Indian, a people of color, were lied to, cheated, slaughtered, mercilessly driven off their lands into reservations of misery and poverty as that nation's first attempt at the execution of a foreign policy. Mexico, a nation of peoples of color on the southern border, coming into being at about the same time as the USA, was the next independent experience in formulating and executing a foreign policy as a nation. The initial thrust outward of the new United States of America beyond the confines of the North American continent was to Haiti and then Cuba, both nations of peoples of color. Becoming bolder and flushed with its victory over Spain, the U.S. reached out into the Pacific Ocean and took the Philippines, another nation of peoples of color. It early probed into Central and South America among the nations of peoples of color for influence and exploitation, playing politics and war with a variety of corrupt politicians and dictators. And then, its first big independent foreign policy adventure outside the hemisphere was with an Asian people of color in Korea. And we all know the embarrassing outcome of the country's second foreign policy encounter with an Asian people of color in Vietnam. It is important to remember the earliest creators of U.S. foreign policy had been European schooled. The only first-hand foreign policy experience they had was with peoples of color, the Native American Indian and the African brought to those shores in chains. Both the Native American and the African were considered less than human, uncivilized barbarians, inferior in all ways to the European, and were treated so. It was assumed and widely propagated that all peoples of color were likewise and in all ways inferior to white European ladies and gentlemen, white European peasants and artisans, white European adventurers, white European prisoners and scoundrels. Is it any wonder then why that country's foreign policy in dealing with nations of peoples of color has largely reflected its contempt for peoples of color rather than its acceptance of them as equals? Today in the United States, the belief in an inherent European superiority, rooted in the belief of an inherent black African inferiority, is being deliberately, skillfully, and effectively cultivated and propagated worldwide by those with a thirst for a New Age imperialism. Throughout the Middle East, in Africa and Asia, as well as throughout Central and South America, heads of state and government reflecting the will of their people, overwhelmingly peoples of color, openly opposed the attack against Iraq. The U.S. mainstream media ignored these declarations. Therefore, the American people do not know this. They do not know that the newly created African Union, representing 53 independent African nations, officially declared its opposition to a war against Iraq. The non-aligned movement, representing 114 developing nations, overwhelmingly peoples of color, at its meeting held in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, officially opposed the aggression against Iraq. Today, as globalization becomes the catchword for universal economic progress, there is a growing realization worldwide of the attempt at globalization of a color line to facilitate that progress. Not only in North America, but also throughout Europe and wherever Europe's kith and kin rule, neo-fascist, racist formations and sentiments proliferate. Violence and arson against peoples of color and wholesale anti-immigration policies directed primarily at peoples of color dominate the political landscape in Europe and North America. The world needs to be reminded over and over that the United States of America was born and raised on a white supremacist ideology, spoon-fed it from the earliest days of the Republic to justify the forced acquisition of the lands of North and South America. The European invaders, calling themselves discoverers, branded the indigenous peoples savage, red beast, without civilization, without religion, without culture, and consequently inferior to themselves. To justify the exceedingly profitable trade in human souls and the institution of African slavery, these same Europeans, becoming Americans, branded their African captives savage, black beast, without civilization, without religion, without culture, and consequently inferior to themselves. No domestic strife can compare in intensity or persistence to that of black-white strife and violence in the brief history of the United States of America. No American has escaped unscathed. We all bear the scars of this color conflict history. But Americans do not know this history. We are taught and told only its myths, its loftiest ideals, and its positive achievements. Consequently, we do not know when and where we erred, nor how, nor why. Yet, we do not question the myths. We pretend to live by the once globally hailed lofty ideals of the rights of a common man. We are blind to the massive violations of those ideals as the nation pursued the glory days to superpower hegemony. We thrust forward to the world our physical and material achievements in science, in technology, in industry and management, banking and commerce, and expect these to provide our moral right to leadership. They do not. When after the horror of 9/11, many students and friends, knowing I had spent much time in the Middle East, asked me, why do they hate us so? My reply was always, they do not hate you and me. They do not hate the American people. They hate the Middle East policies of successive U.S. administrations. The terrorism the world faces today arose from the desperation of a people whose homeland was taken by force and terror, a people humiliated and abandoned. It has been the unsuccessful struggle for justice of that people, the Palestinian people, for nearly half a century that has produced the desperation. As the undisputed superpower in the world, the USA has the responsibility and the means to lead the effort for justice for the Palestinian people. It chooses rather, particularly since the events of 9/11, to abandon this cry for justice in favor of a policy of Middle East, North African domination and unhampered exploitation under the cover of a war against terrorism. Toward these ends, an American foreign policy has been formulated and draws on and depends upon the popular belief in that country that peoples of color, and particularly Africans and Arabs, are inherently inferior to peoples of European origin, and that they are dangerous and fanatically anti-American and anti-European. Let me read you a quote from a book recently published by General Wesley Clark. I think some of you know who that is. It suffices to say he's the contender for the presidency of the United States. And I quote, "As I went back through the Pentagon on November 2001, one of the senior military staff officers had time for a chat. Yes, we were still on the track for going against Iraq, he said. But there was more. This was being discussed as part of a 5-year campaign plan, he said, and there were a total of 7 countries, beginning with Iraq, then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Iran, Somalia, and Sudan." That's on page 130 in Winning Modern Wars by General Wesley Clark. This year, celebrations of the centenary of the publication of W.E.B. Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folk are occurring around the world. In the USA, for 100 years, The Souls of Black Folk has not been out of print. Its recent republication in several English editions, as well as in Spanish in Cuba, in Portuguese in Rio de Janeiro, in Arabic in Cairo, Egypt, in Chinese in Beijing, and most recently in German in Munich, are testament to its status as a world classic. It was in The Souls of Black Folk that Du Bois wrote, "The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line, the relation of the darker to the lighter races of men in Asia and Africa, in America, and the islands of the sea. working together globally to end the color line in the 21st century is an honorable task to which this conference must dedicate itself.
Thank you. Once again, I think we need a warmer round of applause than that. Please. Carrying on with the tradition of his father, Mr. David Dubois. And as we make history here today, we move on